Disappearance of Shere Hite profiles the sex researcher who rose to acclaim in the 1970s before the media turned against her. I'm Thom Powers, and this is Pure Nonfiction. The Disappearance of Shere Hite explores the best-selling author in all her complexity. In 1976, she published The Hite Report that compiled hundreds of survey responses from women about their sexuality. The book became a major bestseller and sparked new conversations about female orgasm, clitoral stimulation, and masturbation, challenging a long history of falsehoods. Hite was different from earlier sex researchers rooted in academia, such as Alfred Kinsey or Masters and Johnson. Hite had been alienated from institutions as a graduate student and made a living as a model, including for Playboy. She was empowered by the women's movement to take up research on her own, overcoming countless hurdles of discrimination. Not even her own publisher saw the book's potential until she held a press conference. She looked like a movie star and was at first embraced by television talk shows with her frank discussions, like this interview.
Well, masturbation is really a cause for celebration because it represents female sexuality underground. The majority of women, even since Kinsey's time, know how to masturbate to orgasm easily, regularly, with great pleasure. So this shows that women know how to have orgasms when they want, contrary to the popular stereotype.
There was a time when Hite was everywhere in American culture. She had a Fifth Avenue apartment and threw star-studded parties. She published a follow-up book based on surveys of men about their sexuality and inner lives. The film contains a montage of what she learned.
What did your father tell you about how to be a man?
25. I've always been emotional. I cried very easy as a child. Not from being hurt physically, but mentally. My father would sometimes tell me to shut up, and I tried, but it was hard.
I never was close to my father. We just discussed matters of minor importance to us, like soccer results and acts of the government. He was the hard parent, and I respected him and had fear of his anger.
The renowned book editor Robert Gottlieb remembers Hite giving him a stack of the men's responses.
Over and over again they said the same thing. We have no one to talk to. We can't share things with people, even our wives.
I have no warmth nor closeness in my life. The only feeling of warmth that I get is when I'm through with work and I'm free to do what I want.
We're isolated.
In the wake of the Hite Report on male sexuality, the tone in the media shifted against her. It was the 1980s. America was growing more conservative, and TV talk shows more combative. She grew increasingly defensive with interviewers.
Why is Shere Hite so sensitive about criticism? Whenever people criticize
you're doing
your
exactly
book,
what you're doing. Exactly.
May I finish my question?
No, and in fact, I think that you're going to keep on like this during the entire thing. And you know what you're doing? Excuse me, I don't care to have this part filmed. You know what you're doing? Exactly what the men in the book do. And then you're going to say you've been accused of man bashing. You're going to
You've been accused.
turn that thing off.
You've been accused of man bashing.
Yeah, and it's going to happen right here. So do you want to do a decent interview or do you want to leave?
The backlash against Hite grew so intense that she moved to Germany in the 1990s and renounced her American citizenship. She died in 2020 in relative obscurity. It was after Hite's death that filmmaker Nicole Newnham felt inspired to tell her story. Nicole teamed up with NBC News Studios. They gained access to Hite's archives, including a wealth of unpublished personal writing. Those passages are read by Dakota Johnson, the actress known for films such as 50 Shades of Grey and The Lost Daughter. Here's a section read by Johnson that expresses Hite's love for classical music as she reflects on how to stay grounded.
Plan for not being a stereotyped creation of your society. Number 1, spend 3 days alone. Number 2, take yourself seriously. Number 3, whenever caught in a situation where you are made to feel girlish and helpless, bitchy and aggressive, or any other stereotype, leave immediately and do any action which you enjoy and is yours.
Nicole has been a co-director on multiple documentaries. Her first film was The Rape of Europa, based on the book about artwork looted during World War II. Her most recent film was Crip Camp, directed with James Lebrecht, about the rise of the disability rights movement. That film found success by every measure. It was released by Netflix and had the backing of executive producers Barack and Michelle Obama. The film was used extensively as a teaching tool and was nominated for an Academy Award. That's a place of privilege for a filmmaker, but also creates expectations over what comes next. I started our conversation by asking Nicole how she chose to focus on Shere Hite.
Well, I really do believe that projects find you, and I don't usually sit around and actually expend time kind of trying to find projects. It's usually something I read or something I hear or a situation I'm thrown in the middle of that, results in something that I just can't shake or feel really passionate about. And for me, it was, we were in the middle of an online Oscar campaign, basically, for Crip Camp in 2020 during the pandemic, when I read the obituary in the New York Times for Shere Hite. And I had thought about her a lot, actually, in the intervening years between when I read the book when I was 12 and, found it hidden in my mother's bedside table. And that fall, when I read the obituary, and the headline was, Shere Hite, she explained how women orgasm and she was hated for it. And I just had that kind of heart-pounding feeling that you have when you come on to something that you're going to want to explore, because the Hite Report had meant so much to me over the years, but it was something I'd never even talked about with anybody else. I couldn't tell my mom about what I was reading because we didn't talk about things like that, but also she had hidden the book from me. I certainly wasn't talking to my friends about it. I was going to college, at Oberlin in the 1980s, and I was kind of busy both exploring sexuality and, I remember I went to a Susie Bright workshop at Oberlin and whatnot, but on the other hand, I really was being impacted by the backlash against feminism, and I didn't want to be a radical feminist for reasons that I kind of now understand better. So I just thought, here's this woman who changed my life by reading the words of other women who responded to her surveys. I had constantly the reassurance that what I was feeling was kind of normal or on the spectrum of what other women experienced, even if there isn't such a thing as normal, and also that there's just such a variety of human sexual experience that anything I was responding to or feeling was sort of okay. And so, I wanted to know, how did she do the work, and why did people hate her, and why had everybody forgotten her? And then I had a chance meeting with Molly O'Brien at NBC News Studios, which was sort of a general right before the Oscars, you should think of us for your future projects kind of meeting. And she told me that they were developing a film on a female sex researcher from the 1970s. And I just about jumped through the Zoom screen and said oh, Molly, is it Shere Hite? Because if it's Shere Hite, I really want to make that film, because I started researching it and thinking about it. But to me, it seemed like such a sensational story that I kind of assumed that Hollywood was all over it and it was kind of hopeless from a rights perspective. But we realized that we had access to her archive at Harvard, and that NBC had all this material, so that kind of kicked us off going down the road together, and it's been an incredible journey.
I want to go back to you first reading the Hite Report when you were 12. Can you describe what your mindset was at the time?
Yeah, my mindset when I was 12 was that sexuality was this sort of mysterious, black hole that I would occasionally get tiny little, glimpses of light coming through the cracks, but basically couldn't access. I would read Judy Blume and there'd be a little there. I remember there was something about sexuality and Anne Frank that was really compelling to me. But basically what I was getting was, occasional peeks at our bodies ourselves when I would go to my friends who had hippie parents' houses, and no one was watching me. And a blue pamphlet that my mother gave me that I remember had drawings of male and female bodies that didn't even have genitals or nipples on them. Wasn't very helpful. So I was very, you don't really question exactly directly when you're young, like why is this huge aspect of life so forbidden from conversation, But reading the book, I realized not only, was it kind of like falling down the rabbit hole into this kind of wonderland of a variety of women's experiences, but I could feel in the responses that it was special that those women were revealing themselves to Shere Hite, and that it was kind of a rare and groundbreaking thing that people were talking about this at all, So yeah, I mean, that was sort of my sense at the time.
Was your experience contextualized with other books? I mean, underneath that book in the drawer, was there copies of other 1970s books, or was that a kind of singular experience for you?
I remember she also had a book called Your Erogenous Zones. Do you remember that one?
I do remember that book.
That was like completely bizarre to me. It didn't really help me too much. Though it was intriguing. And Fear of Flying, which was also really amazing to read.
The interest in Shere Hite was planted a long time ago. Had you followed her career over the years, or had there been a long gap until you read her obituary?
There had been a very long gap. I mean, I thought about the book a lot, actually, but I didn't think about her. I think I was too young and too being kept from mainstream television. My parents didn't have cable, et cetera, to really kind of come to know her public persona, or to see her become kind of the victim of the backlash that the books engendered. And so who she was a complete mystery to me, and there was a photograph of her in the obituary, and, she looks like a 1930s screen siren, and then you're reading that she used to model for Playboy and whatnot, and it's like, there's some incredible story there. How did this person come to accomplish what she accomplished, which I know changed not my life, but the lives of millions and millions of women and men around the world, and then become forgotten.
So you partner with NBC News Studios, you gain access to Shere Hite's archives, and I'm curious to know more about those archives, because you have a lot of personal writing in the film that's read by Dakota Johnson, and I wasn't sure whether that came from the memoir that Shere Hite once published, or if it's from a variety of different sources.
It comes from her autobiography in some places, and those places are delineated by text that you see on the screen, graphic text. And otherwise, those are writings from the Schlesinger library at Harvard. And Shere had negotiated to give her entire archive to them before she passed away. And it had been a very tricky negotiation, and they'd put a lot of work into it, and they had been sure that it would be really compelling and important to have. And then apparently it lay there untouched for a good number of years until we came, calling. And they were thrilled that we were going to be engaging with it. But we were, among the first people to kind of go through it piece by piece. And what was in there was truly extraordinary and exciting. If I had any questions about could this be a film, learning about the contents of that archive quickly answered it, because, not only did they have copies of, not a complete set, but a lot of the original handwritten surveys that respondents sent her for her books, but, and the envelopes they came in and all this wonderful ephemera, but they had audio cassette tapes from the survey respondents that they had mailed in when they were tired of typing, because she was asking people, over 100 questions about their sex lives and gender and all of these things. So, but also they had, she was very hypographic. She wrote all the time, as it turns out, throughout her entire life, and dating way back to, even before she came to New York when she was a very young woman. They had her writings, which were often on just like pages of, typewriter paper. She would throw them in a typewriter and type, or notebooks that she was writing in, or in some cases, backs of opera programs or sticky note pads. She just was writing constantly, and it was easy to, well, not easy, but it was possible to figure out when she wrote those things, and then align them with that time in the story that we were telling, so that we are giving the viewer access to what she was actually thinking about feminism or sexuality or the modeling industry or various things as she was experiencing them herself, because she really was coming home at night and just, writing out her thoughts. And that was really exciting, because she was such a mischaracterized, kind of flattened caricature of herself by the time the media had its way with her, that we really badly wanted to give people access to her and let them experience for themselves the kind of brilliant, unusual way that she was thinking about our society in a more, fully human way.
So they're read by Dakota Johnson. How did she get brought into the project?
So we asked her if she would be willing to participate. I was really excited after watching The Lost Daughter again and thinking about that kind of phenomenal job she did in that film, especially with a character who's so kind of strong and feminine at the same time. And I was excited about the fact that Dakota, is a co-creative director in a intimacy product company called Mod, and she has really kind of put herself out there as somebody who's a proponent of sex positivity and female sexual health and wellness. And so I thought she might be interested to know about Shere. And I was kind of preparing myself to explain who Shere Hite was to her when she called back and said she was interested in the project. But what I found was that she was already a big fan of Shere Hite's. She said, I just want to let you know, I love Shere Hite. If I could have dinner with her tomorrow, I would. She's my kind of person, So there was a real compatibility there with both, I think the story really resonated for Dakota and was politically aligned with her point of view, but also that of Ro Donnelly, her producing partner, and they have a company called Tea Time Pictures, and so Tea Time also joined the project as well, and it's been fantastic actually working with both of them, and I think Dakota added something to the film that was kind of beyond my capacity to imagine, in terms of when we laid the sound in, which Eileen Meyer and I did, our editor, late the night after we did the recording, because we were so excited we couldn't sleep. We just got up and fired up the Avid remotely and started cutting in the voice. And I can't even tell you how emotional it was, because we've been living with Shere Hite for, a long time at that point, a couple of years, and trying so hard to bring people as close to her as possible. And it felt like emotionally we were just making this enormous leap forward in that way, because of how Dakota read Shere's words. It was incredible.
So you gain a lot of insight in the film from people who knew Shere Hite. She was a complex figure and someone who had left the United States decades ago, and it's unclear to me those people who knew her in New York in the 70s and 80s had maintained contact with her or not. But what was it like to get the cooperation of the people who knew her?
Well, it was kind of incredible. I mean, we had this incredible team of producers at NBC News Studios who started doing the outreach. And we started out by looking in the, acknowledgement sections of the books and people that she mentioned in her writings in the archive. And people that were mentioned in this fantastic article where she threw a party and had a giant cake to celebrate everybody who had supported her in making the Hite report, and when they got the 3,000th survey. And she was able, because of her book advance, to pay everyone back. So a lot of people were mentioned and thanked. So we started calling up those people. And sometimes they were very hard to find because they were listed as being Mike Wilson, and there's lots of Mike Wilsons. But we sort of navigated our way to these folks. And when they heard from us, I mean, I would say, except for one publicist who had a really bad run-in with Shere out in LA, everyone was really wanting to go on the record and talk about her. I think that everyone felt somewhat traumatized by what they had seen happen to her, and they really wanted to set the record straight, and that they wanted people to come to know her as a human again. And Mike Wilson, for example, was literally saying to me, please, can you remind people she had a sense of humor? Which I found really moving, because, you don't think about how when somebody's sort of, their reputation is crushed or they're canceled or whatever, how all of those kind of humanizing details about someone kind of get reduced. And so people were excited to talk about it. I think they were also happy to go back to that time in the early 70s when people were galvanized and working together and, imagining what a better society could be and how relationships between men and women could be better. It was kind of thrilling for people to go back into that era. So we had a lot of cooperation. And then people would just keep emerging, like we checked the real estate records for her fabulous apartment she bought after the Hite report came out on Fifth Avenue, and discovered that Donna Summer and Gene Simmons were her neighbors in the condominium, that the building had been turned into. And even Gene Simmons was very happy to talk about Shere Hite because he had really fond memories of her, and also felt really badly about what had happened to her. So it was sort of a great sense of like a reconjuring of the community of people that had been around her and had helped make her work possible.
I mean, probably everyone in a documentary is a combination of strengths and vulnerabilities, but Shere Hite really had those in extremes, as I experience her in the film anyways. She's incredibly brave, but also deeply wounded at times. She's a performer, but who also needs to retreat back into herself to heal from that. Did you find it hard to navigate what maybe seems like contradictions of the multi-sides of her?
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear that all of that complexity came through for you in the film, and that was really important to us. We felt like it wouldn't be enough to just say, here was this great person who did this great thing and she was great. It really was like she had to be able to be the kind of fully fabulous but very complex and, as you say, wounded individual that she was, and be accepted for that, just like she herself kind of lived her life that way. She was uncompromising in wanting to express herself the way she wanted to express herself and dress the way she wanted to dress. And she knew it was going to provoke, negative responses. And she felt she had the right to do it anyway. So we kind of felt we needed to present her in a fully complex manner. And it was challenging. It was challenging because, as we would screen early cuts for people, we would find sometimes, especially older people, actually, people kind of my age and older, would jump into negative ways of looking at her if she was kind of to this or to that, like in an early cut, people were really kind of not enjoying the Fifth Avenue apartment scene because they were saying like, well, when then you go to this scene where she's got this fancy apartment and, all these fabulous clothes, and you're thinking like, does she really care about the work, or is this only about fame and, her obsession with herself and things like that? And so we would have to go back to the edit and really like scaffold it to make it clear, like she had to sue her publisher to get the money for that apartment. And this is what the apartment psychologically meant to her and how it helped her to sort of survive and give you, her own typed written list of kind of self-help tips for how to regain your sense of self when you're, being beaten around by the patriarchy, and all of that together kind of allowed viewers in subsequent screenings to really feel like they were celebrating what she had achieved and what she had created with that apartment along with her, but it was tricky to figure it out.
Well, I mean, as you say that, it strikes me how unique she was as a sex researcher in contrast to predecessors like Masters and Johnson, who like deliberately dressed in lab coats and came out of St. Louis and tried to convey all these really boring trappings around them that somehow made the sex research more accessible, maybe to some people. But Shere Hite was not working within the confines of academia. She dressed like a model. She was literally a model, and I'm sure that complicates the way she was perceived.
Completely. I mean, she was completely dealing with the double standard all the time, and so you could ask yourself, why didn't she just put on a serious suit and a big pair of glasses and not wear makeup and to get treated seriously? And I think her project was bigger than that. Her project was really trying to carve out the space for people to be themselves and express themselves as sexual beings, and that's why it was such a gift to, you see over and over again how she's mistreated and because of that in the media, especially after her book on male sexuality came out. But then we, early in the shooting, we heard that this photographer friend of hers, Iris Brosh, was having a requiem for her in Paris on the first anniversary of her cremation. And we went to see it and to explore the photographs that Iris had taken of Shere as kind of a project of reclaiming an iconography of womanhood that is both intellectual and sexual. That was their project together. And this was after Shere had renounced her citizenship and gone to Europe and really needed healing. And seeing that and seeing these younger French feminists responding to that was just so moving. And it really was like a guiding framework for us and thinking of who Shere was all the way along, right? Like all the way along, that's who she wanted to be and how she wanted to express herself. And so what I hope is people watching the film, see it as not a problematic character trait, but as kind of a revolutionary act, which I think it was.
We see in the film a kind of rise and fall of her experience in the media. I mean, there's, in her early days in the 1970s, she seems to be talking circles around everyone else. She's talking about masturbation and clitoral stimulation and orgasms, and these grown men and women who are interviewing her feel like they don't even know how to talk about these things on television. And then there comes a point, as you chart in the film, in the 1980s, where the media seems to collectively turn against her. And there's a series of events that you capture in the film where she seems not to be able to go on television without being attacked, whereas in a previous decade, she seemed to be mainly celebrated. And I wonder if you have more insight into, how that turned for her.
Yeah, well, I mean, what she thought and wrote about later, and spending hours and hours watching so much media of her and watching it evolve seems to bear this out, in my opinion, is that, the backlash to feminism in general, started brewing and what started becoming especially fervent in the kind of galvanizing and growing religious right. And at the same time, there's kind of a consolidation of the media and a subsequent rise in this kind of gotcha television, where people could turn somebody into kind of a caricature of themselves and attack them and then bat that person around from kind of station to station and channel to channel and know that they were going to, get some kind of scintillating, thing happening if they were attacking a person on TV. And Cher felt like she was one of the first people to receive that treatment. But, it's become a hallmark of our culture and, become a big part of what's going on in social media. And just, it's like something we've never gotten away from. So that is kind of what I think was going on. But I think that, as you said, she was different than Masters and Johnson. She was not wearing a lab coat. She was different than Dr. Ruth. She wasn't cute. And the biggest thing, I think, was that she was always connecting sexual equality and her research to politics. And she was sort of saying like, hey, listen, this is a democracy, but half of the people in the democracy don't, achieve orgasm in most of their sexual relationships. So we should change that. How can we have a democracy if people are not equal in their own bedrooms? And she really believed in that personal as political idea. And that, I think, was just incredibly threatening. And when she started doing it around male sexuality and around marriage and the family, in her book on male sexuality and then her third book, Women in Love, it was just way too much. And I think by attacking her, people were attacking. I mean, of course, she wasn't the only feminist who was being attacked in the media, but she was a really, great photogenic target. So it's brutal. It's brutal to watch.
It is brutal to watch, and it's interesting to hear you describe that she was on the early side of this shift in the media, because it does help explain why maybe she couldn't see it coming. There's scenes in the film where she walks into situations like an Oprah show where the whole audience is men there to respond to her work, and I can't help but think in those moments, like, why, she's such a smart person. Why is she doing this show that seems so potentially self-destructive? But from what you say, I take it that she had this long streak of being able to work with the media, but the media was changing in a way that maybe she couldn't see.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's really true. And, I mean, it's obvious, because we have a particularly intense scene in the film where she goes on an Oprah and faces an all-male audience. And, we know that she called up her close friend, Janet Wolf, who's a psychologist, and asked Janet to be, present because she knew it was going to be hard. So, I mean, to me, that kind of thing indicates like she did know she was going to suffer, and she felt it was worth it. I know that they mailed every single man in that audience a copy of the Hite Report so that they would read it beforehand. And of course, you can see when you watch the film that it's unclear if any of them actually did read it, but I can imagine her thinking that was incredible. I mean, she kept going on TV shows in Europe, and it was better than in the US, but it was still hard. And she was still constantly asked, more about her high heels or her nail polish or her own sex life or things like that than she was about the work. But she kept doing it, and she kept writing, and she kept publishing, and she kept trying. And one can see from reading all of her letters and notes and journals from all of those years that she really never lost her belief in people's capacity to, if they could finally kind of hear and understand the truths that she was trying to put forward, respond in a way that would be healthy for society. And by the end, she was saying things like, this whole kind of media Christian right thing is either going to force us back into a traditional family, patriarchal family model and not let anyone get out of it, or they're going to change. And if they force us back into that model and make it impossible for people to live outside of that, then we're going to be really vulnerable to authoritarianism, is what she said, which I think is so interesting, and sadly kind of like so much what we've evolved towards. I think she saw so many things coming, both good things, like the way that younger generations think about gender and sexuality now, I think have really evolved, thanks to her and so many other people, but also the darker things, that we've been confronting. And I think she was really afraid of something like the, Dobbs decision.
So you mentioned that she renounced her American citizenship in the 1990s, and the film certainly shows why she had good reason to feel frustration with the country. But renouncing your citizenship is, taking it to an extreme. Do you have more insight into what her thinking was there?
I think she was. I didn't find any kind of document that laid out in kind of detail her thinking around that. Although she writes about it in her autobiography, and she had felt that the United States had become a place that was hostile to her and in which she couldn't publish or make a living, and I think she wanted to indicate that, to make a statement about that. I did hear from some friends of hers. It was interesting. A number of her American friends said that they thought she regretted having done that and that she would have wanted to have moved back to New York at various points. I don't think she regretted it as a political statement, but I think, just practically speaking, there were points when she wanted to move back to the States. But her European friends really disagree. They felt that she was very happy living in Europe and that she had, was living in a place that was open enough to where she could thrive, more so than in the U.S. So yeah, I think she wanted, in terms of her own narrative, to align herself with other artists and thinkers who had been persecuted for their iconoclastic ideas and beliefs. I think that was important to her, and I think that might have been a reason why she did that.
Well, it's fascinating in light of that she then makes the decision to store her papers in the United States at Harvard.
That's really true. And I think it was really important to her. I think it was really important to her that they be there, as we show in the film, she had a really complex and difficult relationship with academia, and in which she felt she was really subject to a lot of classism and sexism, and could never really find a home there. But yet, she really was a public intellectual. And so I think the sort of reputation and seriousness of the Harvard archive was really important to her. It's just so incredibly wonderful that those things are there. Apparently they were in storage lockers all over the world at that point, her papers, because she'd had to kind of move around so much and become kind of nomadic at the end of her life. So I'm very grateful for us and making the film and for future generations. I'm excited to think of what hopefully, other people might go in and do with all of that material. It's really so extraordinary.
I want to ask about you as the filmmaker of this project. When I look at your IMDb credits, the other 5 feature documentaries that you've done were all done in partnership with co-directors. So what did it mean for you to take on this project as a single director?
Well, I love collaborating, and I think that's one reason why I love being a documentary filmmaker. It's a way to create work in close collaboration with a small group of people, and that's like for me the biggest joy of it. So I've always loved co-directing, and I confess a little nervous to I think, yeah, it kind of went against my instinct to do it, but in some interesting way, I do feel like the film is kind of bringing me back to impulses I had, when I first got out of film school, and I asked myself, like, what kind of stories do I want to tell and how do I want to tell them? And I was very interested in stories out of women's history, and I discovered they were extremely hard to fundraise for or get made, and so it's incredibly meaningful to me to be able to kind of return to that into something that is such a huge part of my own childhood and life, and then to be able to kind of build the team the way I wanted to build it, and make the film the way I wanted to make it. But I will say that, because the film is so heavily archival and was so much constructed in the edit room, I feel like I had co-directors. I feel like, and actually the producers too, I felt like it was really like this incredible group of women, ranging from, Mary Lampson, who's in her 70s, who was a consulting editor with us, and we did some of the editing at her house in Maine, to Lauren Schwartzman, who's, in her mid-30s, and then, of course, Eileen Meyer, our main editor, who's a little older than Lauren, and, like, all of us were kind of creating something like what we imagined the consciousness-raising groups of Shere Hite's time were, in terms of how we thought of the editing process and how we made the film. And I just, I guess what I'm trying to say is that even though it was like my debut as a solo director, I think I still was able to craft a process and a team and an experience, or set one up that enabled me to be just as collaborative in the making of it.
So to bring this back to Shere Hite, as I watch the film, I'm sure as most people watching the film, there'll be touch points of what she was struggling to convey 50 years ago that echo to us in contemporary times as battles that have not been fully won, or teachings that have not been fully absorbed. And I wonder for you, what were the strongest things that stood out to you from the work she was doing in the 1970s that still feel absolutely relevant in 2023?
I mean, kind of all of it. Like obviously the bodily autonomy piece is urgent, and I've been screening this film in states where they have restrictive abortion law now, and people are so angry and upset after watching the film because they're connecting it to their own really traumatic experiences, as a result of those laws. So that's one obvious place. I think the conversation around female sexuality, I mean, my sons, are constantly sharing with me a lot of the misogyny that they see online as like teenage boys. I think that, the double standard is something we're still fighting. People still don't, you wouldn't believe the number of people I engage with around this project who are being forced to say the word clitoris for the first time, men and women, because they're talking about the project and they don't know how to pronounce it and they feel funny saying it. Can you imagine if, nobody knew how to pronounce the word penis? It is kind of amazing to talk to women who are kind of working in the footsteps of Shere Hite around those issues today, and to see that they still have trouble getting their work seen or funded or written about in, major publications, because people are afraid of even talking about female sexuality, which still just takes such a huge toll on really all of us. So And then I think the sort of male isolation and, feeling of isolation and feeling of not being able to express oneself emotionally that Shere was tapping into when she did her survey on male sexuality it's hard to say that there's been an enormous amount of progress there, And I do have men coming up to me at screenings all over the country talking to me about that time when they used to be involved in the women's movement, where they were really like on board for this kind of experiment that Shere was engaged in, of like what would happen if we actually really did try to, break down these barriers and have better conversations and better sex lives. And I feel there's an enormous hunger out there for the kind of dialogue that Shere was trying to help us engage in. And I think the work is just as relevant and alive today as it was then.
I want to thank Nicole Newnham for speaking with me. The Disappearance of Shere Hite is released by IFC Films. Thanks to our team, series producer Hannah Nordenswan, marketing manager Bella Racklin, and web designer Cross Strategy. Our theme music is composed by Andre Williams, and our executive producer is Raphaela Nehausen. I'm Thom Powers. You can follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our free newsletter at purenonfiction.net.